Welcome into TYT's The Conversation. Thank you so much for joining us, because this time I have for you Justin Moyer, Washington Post reporter, who's going to talk to us about a recent pass in legislation that's been signed by President Biden. Thanks for joining us, Justin.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yes, so on Monday, President Biden released a plan that was essentially, it's looking to aim to reduce homelessness in the US. Can you tell us about it?
Yes, this is a bit of a catch-all plan, an aspirational plan, if you will. That's just trying to reduce what many Americans see as an emergency. People living in tents, people not being able to afford affordable housing. This is the president's, the Biden administration's attempt just to sort of throw everything at this problem, or at least appear that it is throwing everything at this problem.
Yeah, and it definitely seems to be a problem, as you've noted, that a lot of people have brought to the surface that some of their concerns are the number of unhoused people, and especially when we're seeing so many climate-related impacts on our communities, whether it's a flooding going on right now in Northern California or storms. And the fact is that people do not have shelter, and we're the wealthiest nation, so we should be able to care for them. So what is this plan really getting at in terms of what are the goals here?
Well, that's what advocates want to know. The plan purports to reduce homelessness by 25% by 2025. That's a lot of 25s. Basically, they want to cut homelessness by a fourth in the next 2 years. That, at least to many, to some, seems a very ambitious goal, especially in the wake of a pandemic and ahead of what many folks see as a probable recession. And they're just trying to attack this, on all fronts by building more affordable housing, by preventing people from becoming homeless in the first place, by improving wraparound services. This is really a Swiss Army knife type plan that the administration has come up with.
Wow, it definitely sounds very bold. 25% is a really big number. And I know right now with the US Interagency Council that in their findings in terms of homelessness, that they found that there's more than 1.2 million people who have experienced at least sheltered homelessness in 2020. So that just seems like it's impacting quite a number of people across the nation. And so I'm wondering, are Biden's goals really realistic?
Advocates appeared, I guess I would say, cautiously optimistic. Some folks told me, this all sounds great, but how's this all going to come together? Who's going to build the affordable housing? Who is going to prevent people from becoming homeless in the first place? And it sort of remains to be seen. How this is going to work, if it's going to work, and who's going to make it work.
Yeah, and it seems like also it fails to take into account that individuals who are unhoused can have a lot of struggles and afflictions that just providing housing alone won't necessarily fix. And so if the social support networks aren't there, then nothing is going to help guarantee that the individual doesn't experience homelessness again.
Indeed, and actually part of this problem is trying to figure out how many people are homeless. There's something called a point in time count. That sounds very technical. Basically, all it means is that there's one night in January, it's actually in a few weeks, where homeless providers all around the country go out and hunt for homeless people. They look in, buildings, near train stations, in rural areas. They look in, fields. And this is not really, according to some advocates, a reliable way of measuring this problem, because, if you're not homeless on that particular night, you may not be counted, and then what if you become homeless in February or in August? So just even understanding the scope of this problem has proven difficult for the administration, for people trying to help. It really is something as a society we haven't really gotten our hands around, at least not yet.
Indeed, and it also seems like we're not necessarily realizing that there are a lot of people out there that are homeless that still have jobs. There's a 2021 study from the University of Chicago that estimates that 53% of people living in homeless shelters and about 40% of those who are unsheltered were employed either full-time or part-time in 2021. That really says a lot. in terms of the fact that people are out there doing the best that they can, but either wages or other aspects of the system are failing them.
Indeed, and this report, this plan sort of made the point that there's not really many places, if anywhere, that you can afford housing, even if you're working a full-time job at the minimum wage. And that's really something that calls for an economic response that the administration maybe hasn't totally made clear, how it's going to get more money in those people's pockets. Employed people who are working, who should be able to afford a place to live, who just in this environment cannot.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that it's been in Biden's face for a bit in terms of the federal minimum wage being at $7.25 and that being incredibly low. The National Low Income Housing Coalition's Out of Reach report had found that for a household to be able to even afford a 2-bedroom apartment, they have to make $23 per hour. That is something that seems so incredibly out of reach when we keep minimum wages so incredibly low. So if we do actually want to eradicate housing, it seems like we need to not only look in terms of the social support networks that are there, but also about the wages that are being provided so people can afford to have housing.
Indeed, and for various reasons, it seems like raising that federal minimum wage is a non-starter. Meanwhile, a problem that this plan pointed to is the criminalization of homelessness in many places. For example, in California, for example, in New York, where the mayor has decided to make it easier to commit people who may be struggling with mental illness, who are perhaps living in the subway. And even in DC, there is a plan to clear every tent from the city, at least from what I understand, from federal land in the city. These communities that in some places have been permitted to grow during the pandemic, come spring are going to be dismantled, and what will happen to the folks who live there? It's not really clear whether they will get vouchers or some other kind of housing. It's really an unsolved problem right now.
No, unsolved indeed. And it's unfortunate because we have all the answers and we also have the resources. We've just chosen not to direct them toward addressing the actual issue. And it seems that people are more offended by the presence of unhoused people and the appearance it gives in terms of having these tent-like communities as opposed to actually taking care of people.
Indeed, and advocates like to point out that, this is a solvable problem. It's not really a mystery. The solution to homelessness is housing. Of course, critics of those advocates say, well, the problem is, more complicated if people are dealing with addictions, mental illness, or maybe a desire not to work. But however this pans out, it seems like we just need more physical spaces for people to occupy if they're going to be, thrown out of their tents. If there's not enough shelter space, if there's not enough voucher space, and where that those spaces will come from is not really clear under this plan.
No, and the thing is, we know that we need something concrete, clear, and something effective, especially since we do have considerable research. We know what needs to be done. And I had just found something I ran across on Twitter earlier today that I thought was really interesting. And it said that in Finland, the number of homeless people has fallen sharply. The reason? The country applies the housing first concept, which means those affected by homelessness receive a small apartment and counseling without any preconditions. And all this is cheaper than accepting homelessness. And the thing is we have so many nations around the world that have figured it out, and they have all the answers and we have all the answers, yet we can't seem to figure it out.
Yeah, it sounds like they have a social democracy going on over there. We don't really quite have that here. And I know just from reporting in DC, when people do get spaces, subsidized spaces in fancy apartments, sometimes the residents who live there are not thrilled about it. They call the police, they complain about people coming and going. There's a lot of racially coded language. So, just because someone gets a space doesn't mean the problem ends when someone decides that that person is a problem for whatever reason, their skin color or the amount of money they don't make or their lifestyle or whatever. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out.
Absolutely, and I really hope that this plan is something meaningful, even though it doesn't seem to be the case. It seems more of, antics of some kind of performative act as opposed to something substantive. So I don't necessarily want to commend Biden yet. And I know I initially came in this saying it was legislation. Unfortunately, it's not, just being a plan. And so we'll see what happens. But in terms of the work you're doing, is there anything that is coming up on the forefront for you?
Again, the point in time count is always a very controversial time of year. I believe it's the last Wednesday of the month. So I'm gonna hopefully travel to a rural area, a place not like Washington, D.C., to see how they count homeless people out there where they may be difficult to find or doubled up or housing insecure. Advocates like to say that homelessness is more visible in urban areas because there are more people, but homelessness is everywhere, in the middle of the country, in red states, in rural counties. So, I'm just eager to see how advocates find these folks so that they can help them. And hopefully that will be instructive.
All right, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate the work you do, and we look forward to reading more of your work. And where can people find you?
I am on Twitter at JustinWilliamMoyer.com. The William is WM, so it's Justin Moyer. Probably need a more catchy Twitter handle, but that's what I'm working with now.
All right, well, thank you so much, and we will work with that as well. Take care, Justin.
Thanks so much.